We're going to begin with you for the first question. As America continues to see protests in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, it once again shines a light on disparities in the criminal justice system. Mr. Markey, as a congressman in 1994, you voted for a Get Tough on Crime bill that created a more punitive criminal justice system. A disparate number of black Americans make up the country's prison population, and experts have said that law played a role. Do you now regret supporting that bill?
Thank you for hosting this debate this evening. Every member of the Massachusetts delegation voted for that crime bill. Every member. That included a ban on assault weapons. It included the institution of the Violence Against Women's Act. Very important changes. It also had in it sentencing guidelines that were totally wrong and have to be changed. And from my perspective, we have to ensure that we correct that. But let me also say this, that when Congressman Kennedy became a lawyer, he decided to go to work for the most conservative Republican right-wing district attorney in Massachusetts in a generation. The prosecutor that Joe Kennedy worked for was someone who did not believe that 3 strikes and you're out is strong enough, did not believe in the legalization of marijuana, constantly prosecuted the most minor of drug offenses, and Congressman Kennedy had to decide where he was going to work as a lawyer. And I don't think it was good judgment, especially as we look at New Bedford and Fall River, and we can see these voices that are being raised up against the status quo in the criminal justice system in our country. I don't think it was good judgment for Congressman Kennedy to go to work for that right-wing Republican district attorney.
Why don't we have you weigh in here, Mr. Kennedy? He's talking about Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe. He has been an outspoken critic of the criminal justice reform. As he points out, when you left Harvard Law School, you could have worked for anybody, but you chose a Republican district attorney. Why him?
I'm not sure I could have worked for anybody, but I appreciate it. But first off, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this debate. Look. I spent my first couple of years as a prosecutor learning our criminal justice system. And I actually, when I went to work with Michael O'Keefe, of course, we had big differences of agreement. He was a Republican district attorney who hired a guy named Kennedy to go in as an entry-level prosecutor. We, of course, had disagreements. I find it a little surprising, though, given what Senator Markey's stance has been on the need for what he says about criminal justice reform, that he's now actually advocating to say that you shouldn't have progressive prosecutors work in offices. Of course that's the change we want to see. We celebrate now progressive prosecutors actually using their own experiences, their judgment, their determination on how cases should be.
But didn't you help campaign against a progressive prosecutor with DA Rollins, who is now the Suffolk County DA? You chose her opponent in a primary. She obviously won out on that. At what point do your actions and your words conflict?
So, Ted, thanks for letting me clarify on that. Tim, excuse me. Thank you. Apologies. Thank you for letting me clarify on that. I didn't endorse in that race. Yes, I go back with one of the individuals in that race, Greg Henning, a long way, but I didn't endorse in that race, and Senator Markey didn't either. So I think what's critical to understand at this moment, when our nation has been wrestling with the wounds that go back decades, if not centuries, is what have we done to try to address it? And let me be clear about this. My own record on this, no one has done enough. Have I done enough? No. Has Senator Markey? No. But the difference is, since I came into Congress, I've been deliberate about trying to tackle those challenges and racial disparities, whether it was one of the first bills I passed on education, whether it's bills I filed to actually address the way in which wrongful death cases are calculated and amounts are calculated, whether it gets to maternal mortality, and whether it gets to access to a lawyer. The difference here, Tim, is that this isn't just a question of Senator Markey's vote for a 1994 crime bill, but the long-standing record of judgment that he's shown. When he came into office, he actually opposed the integration of the Boston public school system. And again, it's not just those positions, it's the fact that there hasn't been a deliberate effort to actually address those structural challenges that he helped codify into law.
Mr. Markey, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
No, thank you. Yeah. So it just comes back to Congressman Kennedy's judgment, his choice. He could have worked for anyone. He could have worked for the Innocence Project. He could have worked as a tenants' rights attorney. But instead, he decided to go and work for a right-wing Republican who opposes the kinds of progressive changes that we're looking for. That was a choice which Congressman Kennedy made with his legal career. That's who he worked for. That was not the right place for a progressive to be working.
Do you want to respond to his charge from the 1970s?
If I may, and moreover, in this race, Rachel Rollins, the district attorney of Suffolk County, is endorsing me because I partner with her in advocating for the kind of criminal justice reform that our country needs. And I'm very proud of having Rachel Rollins' support because she is the embodiment of the kind of change which we need, the kind of progressive leadership which we need. And today, we are partnering together. That's the kind of progressive leadership for the future that we need in the criminal justice system, and I'm very proud of her support in this race.
Congressman, 30 seconds. Please.
Senator, I'm glad to see that you're paying attention to these issues now. You've been in office for 47 years at the state system and the federal system. You were in the House for nearly 40 years, and you've been in the Senate for 7. The images that we see across our television screens, those protests and demonstrations that we have attended, I was in Chelsea yesterday. We marched through the streets with District Attorney Rollins and then held a moment of silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I never knew that 8 minutes and 46 seconds could last so long. To think of a man gasping for his breath and calling for his mother. And the fact is that what we see playing out on our streets today is the fact that we are right here where we were, which is not all that different from where we were 50 years ago in 1968. And we have not made any progress because the laws and the structures that have been come down as a boot on the neck of communities of color, those are not an accident. They were deliberate, they were intentional, and they came in by choice. And you might be known for some things in your time in office, Senator. Racial justice and criminal justice is not one of them.
All right.
Oh, let me just go. I have to answer that.
Thought.
I have to answer that. Look, Congressman Kennedy had a chance to sign on to Medicare for All when it was introduced. I stood with Bernie Sanders to fight for health care for everyone. Medicare for All. It took Congressman Kennedy 2 years to sign on to Medicare for All. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy decided he was going to work for a right-wing Republican district attorney. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy decided that he was going to vote to send military weapons to the local police in our country. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy had a chance when he gave the State of the Union response to Donald Trump to talk about climate change. Congressman Kennedy did not mention the word climate change in his response. Congressman Kennedy is a progressive in name only. When he gets a chance to lead on Medicare for All, on climate change, on the militarization of the streets of this country, he was not a progressive leader. And when he had to make a decision as to who he was going to work for as a lawyer, he decided to work as a lawyer for a right-wing Republican. That is not the kind of progressive leadership which our country needs desperately right now.
Let me wrap up the criminal justice section of this conversation with a final question. I'm looking for a quick answer on this. And Mr. Markey, I'll direct it to you first. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently supported the Defund the Police movement and advocated for funneling money from law enforcement to social service programs. Do you agree with her?
We have to restructure our balance between the criminal justice system and the funding for education, for health care, for job opportunities in our society. Yes, it is absolutely critical that we stop this school to prison pipeline that we have in our country and that we fund the kinds of programs that young people of color need in our country in order to make sure that they can maximize their God-given abilities.
Do you fund those programs by pulling money from police departments? That's the question.
I think that we have to reallocate the budget. Yes, we need a rebalancing of the budget between policing and healthcare and education and other opportunities. It is time for us to have that debate and to effectuate those changes in our society. And I think that's what everyone in New Bedford and Fall River who are out every single night are saying to us.
Mr. Kennedy, brief response, please.
I think we have to totally reform the way that we police in this country. And that does mean going to our budgets and reallocating those budgets and making sure that we fund not just the mechanisms necessary to keep people safe, but mental and behavioral health services. It means making sure that you've got folks that are trained to make sure you're addressing the root causes of this and not continue to just put people in jail.